All right. My name is Muthoni, and I write stories for children mainly. I've also written some for adults and some for children of all ages, some grown up. The stories I write are drawn from mainly experiences I've had. Many stories have been told by my grandmother. I grew up on a farm about 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours from the capital city of Nairobi. It's up in the Rift Valley. I grew up in a forest. Right after, I know maybe you don't know much about Kenyan history, but we were colonized by the British. And in the 1950s, there was a struggle for independence. And my mother's family were very involved in that. And many people from where I come from were displaced from their land, and they had to move. And after independence, my parents were one of the first four families to move to what was then a forest, and they had to resettle in this forest and learn how to survive in this forest. And the forest overlooks the Great Rift Valley. So many Mzungus, when they come there, many white people, when they come there, they say, oh, how beautiful. But my parents did not find it beautiful. They found it a lot of hard work because it meant they had to cut down trees in order to plant, and it was a very hard living. It was also substantially colder than where they came from. So there was a lot of rain. There was, and like I said, because it was a forest, it was very dark. There was a lot of wildlife. So the stories that my grandmother told, because my father brought my grandmother to live, to settle her in a farm right near us. And the stories that my grandmother told were usually full of very scary animals. Do you like scary stories? You like scary stories? Yes, my grandmother loves scary stories. So my grandmother particularly liked stories about leopards because in that forest there were very many leopards. And it was a scary place to be when you were a child and there were very few people. Like I said, we're only four families that lived there. So what happened is that every day we'd have to go and work. This is going back to the 1960s, so I'm a lot older than I look. So in this area, we'd have to work all day in the fields. We had to wake up very early, milk the cattle, and then we'd go and work in the fields. And then about 3, 4 o'clock, we go back home to eat. And then after eating at about 5 o'clock, we'd cross the forest to go to my grandmother's. So my sister and I are about the same age. My sister is just 1 year older, younger than me. And we'd cross the forest. And when you cross the forest, I don't know, my grandmother loved to tell about leopards. And if you know leopards have got very long tails, right? And my grandmother used to say, never step on a leopard's tail. You never step on? Oh, yes. You never, ever step on the tail of a leopard. So when my sister and I would cross the forest, if you've ever been in a forest and you see how the branches look on the ground, especially at 5 o'clock when the sun is setting, everything looks like a leopard's tail. So when we'd cross the ground, we'd be jumping with my sister. We'd say, watch out, watch out. And we'd run through the forest like that, just jumping over the leopard's tails until we get to my grandmother's house. And my grandmother's house was the typical village hut. And we'd sit around the fire, and it's very smoky and very dark, so the atmosphere was always full of the breath of a leopard. You always feel like there's something going on in here. But we love to hear her stories. And I'll tell you one of my grandmother's favorite stories. And when I say my grandmother was a storyteller, she was full of sound effects, Yeah? Jurassic World could learn something from her. Anyway, so my grandmother would tell us a story. So this is one of her stories. I'll need a volunteer. Will you volunteer? No. Okay, I'll call you later. I'll call you. All right. Well, might be another volunteer. You're not the only one. Anyway, so this is my grandmother's story. So she says something like this. She'd say, there are these very beautiful women in the village, and they're young, and they're lonely. And they gather in a gathering under a canopy of trees, and they're lonely. And they sing and dance and sing and dance and sing and dance, and they're lonely. And they start to complain and talk about how they're lonely. What they don't realize, right above them, in that canopy, is a leopard. And the leopard is the original shapeshifter, if you did not know. And the leopard would listen to these girls, these beautiful girls, singing in beautiful voices about how they're lonely. And the leopard thought to itself, I can alleviate that loneliness. And so the leopard crept down the tree, and the leopard went behind the trees, and the leopard transformed itself into the most handsome young man. So he went into his granary, and he dug up all the maize and grain that he had stored over there, and he put the clothes, he pushed them right at the bottom of the granary. And then he ran all the way back to the dry riverbed. And he said to the big, beautiful woman sunning herself in the riverbed, he said to her, now you must marry me. I have hidden your clothes. And she said, I cannot believe you can do that. You don't understand anything. I cannot be without my clothes. Please don't do this. And she begged, but Ivonyangai turned a deaf ear to that. He said, you must marry me. And finally she said, well, if I must, I will marry you. And we will have a wonderful home. As long as you keep one promise. You will never, ever, ever. And Ivonyangai, when he started hearing those evers, got very worried. Because when you're a hunter, sometimes the price you pay is your life to catch whatever it is that you're trying to catch. So he got worried. Then the woman continued. She said, you must never, ever make me beg again. Do you promise? And Ivonyangai raised his hand, his finger to his lips, and he licked his tongue, and he raised the finger to the maker, and he said, I will never, ever make my big, beautiful wife beg again. He made his promise to the maker. And so they went home. Ivonyangai and his big, beautiful wife. And as they went home, he started dancing and singing, and it continued, the merrymaking continued through the next few days of the wedding. And in the wedding, they sang Tembo. And you have to sing Tembo. It's just a simple tune. Tembo, 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 Tembo. Tembo, tembo, tembo. Tembo, 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 tembo. And so they sang and they made merry. And in the fullness of time, they made big, beautiful children. And they were nice, fat, cheek children. And they were a very happy couple. But then what happened is in the savannah, you may not know this, but when you have several years of rain and wet and fertile land, when the animals are plenty, those years are usually followed by 7 long years of dryness. 7 long years of no rain, no sight of water, when the food becomes harder and harder to find. So during this period, when there's famine, there's drought, it's very difficult for those who survive in the savannah. So what happened during those years, as the years went on, and the rains wouldn't come, and the rains wouldn't come, they became hungrier and hungrier. And every day when Ivonyanga went into the savannah to hunt, all he could find were wild roots. He'd follow the birds, and when they dropped the seeds, he would take those seeds. And soon there was not even that. Soon he was reduced to digging up roots. Soon he was reduced to taking the bones of the animals that had died in the savannah to go home, take them to his wife to boil for soup. Things were difficult. And every night his children would cry. And they would cry and they'd say, oh, Tembo, 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 Tembo. We are so hungry. We cannot sleep. And Ivonyanga, he was so worried. He could not sleep. You know how wonderful men are. Can they sleep when their children are hungry? They could not. You understand, yes? Oh, it was so sad. He was so sad. He could not sleep. And every night he walked up and down in his bedroom. He could not sleep. He walked up and down. He could not sleep. And then one day, his wife, she turned to him and she said, you know how wonderful women are, how much they care for their family, yes? The answer is yes. So she said to him, dear husband, I have a solution. It is going to sound a bit strange, but I have a solution. It can only be a solution this once. Only once. You understand? And of course he said yes. What do you say when you're desperate? Any solution whatsoever. He said, woman, tell me, what is the solution? And she said, I want you to rub these two teeth. What are those two teeth called? Ah, somebody went to school, eh? Yeah? You rub these canines, yeah? Ivanyanga, he said. She's gone Dululi. Is it Dululi? Dulali. Dulali. I learned that one yesterday. She's gone Dulali. What is wrong with my wife? What's wrong with her? If your wife tonight said to you, rub my teeth, would you do it? No? You are not desperate man. So, Ivanyangai was a desperate man. So he said, oh, she wants me to rub her teeth. I will rub her teeth. I don't know. It sounds very strange, but I will rub her teeth. And so that night, while he lay sleeping, she lay sleeping, he rubbed her teeth. At first, he rubbed a little bit. Then he felt something. He felt I don't know what you call it. In English, I think we call it vivi in my language, you know. He felt a vividness, Heebie-jeebie, You know what I mean? You know it? Now let's see if you know it. You know that feeling, You know it? Yeah, that feeling. So when he rubbed her teeth, he felt that, and he jumped back and he said, what is going on here? And she said, just rub. And so he rubbed some more, and he rubbed some more. And lo and behold, the teeth started growing. The teeth started growing. The teeth started growing. And soon she could not close her mouth. And the teeth were like this. And he said, rub. And I rub. What is this? And he sat down and he contemplated. And she called him and she said, Ivanyangai, rub. And so he came back and he rubbed. And he rubbed her teeth. And I need a volunteer to hold this mic because I have to show you. Will you come? So you have to hold it to my mouth, okay? And so you can see. I have a very able assistant here. So he rubbed her teeth. He rubbed her teeth. He rubbed her teeth. And he rubbed her teeth. And he rubbed her teeth. And as he rubbed, the teeth began to grow and to grow and to grow. And then you have to say the words. And he rubbed and he rubbed and he rubbed. Yeah? And so he rubbed and he rubbed and he rubbed. And the teeth began to grow. And as he rubbed, the teeth began to grow. And lo, the teeth were down here. And Ivanyangai stepped back and he said, what is going on? I have to rest. I don't understand. And she begged. She said, Ivanyangai, rub my teeth. And so she was lying there. And he thought, okay. And so he rubbed. Soon the teeth were up to here. And because the teeth were up to here, he stopped. And he was so tired. And he said, Sleep in the morning, get a machete and cut them. And Ivanyangai said, are you saying that I sleep and in the morning I get a machete and I cut your teeth? Is that what you're saying? And she, the pain. And when Ivanya Nyangai got on the bed where she had been lying down, all he could feel, can you see all his sweat and tears? All his sweat and tears were dripping down, just dripping down. And and she was crying, the bed was wet. And she kept saying throughout the night, the pain, the pain, the pain, the pain. And that's why he woke up in the morning. She was still crying, the pain, the pain, the pain. And when he got up in the morning, he rushed quickly outside. He wanted to relieve her. He rushed outside and he grabbed he grabbed a machete. And when he grabbed a machete, he came back in. Will you be my volunteer to hold this? Come on, this side. So he grabbed the machete. And when he grabbed the machete, he came back to the bed. And she said to him, she was holding the bedstead. And she's lying there. And she said to him, cut! Cut! And so he took the machete. And he grabbed one tooth. And he cut. And as he cut, okay. Hello? And so he grabbed one tooth, and with the other hand, he cut her tooth with a machete. And all that could be heard in the room was this. Oh. And in his hand was the biggest tooth he'd ever seen. And he took it to one side. And as he paused, his wife said, cut the other one, cut, cut, cut. And so he grabbed the other tooth and he can you see? He was just sweating up a storm. He could not believe it. Thank you, my dear. He was sweating up a storm. And so he rested back, and his wife said, I will get you some food. Then I want you to go with those teeth. I want you to carry them across the savannah, all the way to the coast, and I want you to sell those teeth to the traders. And for what you get, I want you to buy as much grain, as much food that will last us until the rains come. And so that is what Ivonyangai did. He grabbed the teeth and he transversed the savannah, carrying these two teeth on his back. And to cheer himself up, he would just sing, Tembo, 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 all the way to the coast. And as he reached the coast, the Arab traders at the coast, they started singing to him, Alhamdulillahi, Alhamdulillahi. What a blessing. Look at the size of those tusks. You must be a mighty hunter. You must be a mighty hunter. And so the Arab traders, they were so happy. And they negotiated. And they negotiated. And they said to him, you can have all the grain you want. You can have sacks and sacks of anything you want, as long as you allow our porters to escort you back to where you got this mighty elephants, so that they can get their own mighty elephants and bring tusks back like you did. And at first, Ivonyangai was a bit uneasy. It's like, how can I tell them where I got these tusks? But on the other hand, how could he not? He could not go back home empty-handed. He had to carry home food. And so they gave him these porters, 100 porters, to carry all the sacks of, grain, the maize, the rice, the dried fruit, the dates, and all the sweet meats you get from the Arab traders. And the cloths, beautiful cloths in all colors, the kangas and the lesos and all that. And so he carried these across the desert. And the porter sang to him, "Oh, you mighty hunter of tasks. Oh, you mighty hunter of tasks. Tembo, 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 tembo," until they got back home. And for 7 days they feasted. 7 days, him and his 100 porters, and his wife and his big fat chick children, because now they had their chick fat back from eating all that food. And they ate and they were happy. But on the 7th day, his wife said, "These porters, they're too many. If they stay here, there'll be no food left. And we kill them for their tasks." And so they searched the savannah. And they searched the savannah, but there was not a single elephant to be seen. And then one day, Ivanyanga, he was at home. And his wife said, "We've now come to the end of our food. We've got food for only one more day. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do?" And Ivanyanga, he started, walking up and down the room at night saying, "Oh, I cannot bear it. I cannot imagine my children crying again. I cannot bear it. The idea of my children crying because they have no food? No, 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 no. I don't want that." Wife, there's one solution. What is the solution? Do you know? You don't know? Yes, he turned to his wife and said, "Why don't you let me rub your teeth again?" And his wife said, "You promised, made a promise to the Maker that you would never ever make me beg again. So now I am telling you the answer is no today, it will be no tomorrow, it will be no until the end of time. You have no idea what pain. You have no idea what you're asking me to do. It is not of this world." And he looked at her. And Ivanyanga, he was not a bad man. He wasn't. He was human, yeah? So he felt sorry for her. And he said, "Okay, we'll come up with another solution." And so his wife turned and she slept. And Ivanyanga, he would have kept his promise. Except for one thing. The moon. You know, at night, when you close your curtain, sometimes you leave a little space. Just a little space by accident. That is what happened that night. There was a little space in the curtain. And there was a full moon. And the full moon was glinting right through to the bed. It was like a halo around her head. And it was glinting. And she slept like you do, sir, with your mouth a bit open. And so when Ivanyanga looked, he saw a glint of white. Just a glint, a little white. And it was like it was calling him. It was as if it was just saying, "Come." And he fought with his conscience. He said, "I know I promised her. But it must be a sign. It must be a sign from the Maker. It must be a sign." Right? And so what did he do? He rushed outside and he got a rope and he tied his woman to the bed. He tied her hands and he tied her feet so that she could not stop. She could not stop him. And he closed his heart. And I've asked on you too much. Will you come? Will you come? Come and be my expert microphone holder. And so it repeated. What did she do? What did Ivanyanga do? And this time he did not stop. He went at it with gusto. Please go at it with gusto. And when his hands got tired, Thank you. So, Ivanyanga rubbed, and all the time she was just crying. She cried until the bed was wet. She cried until her tears really made the room, which is covered with mud, it made it all muddy. And She cried. She could not speak. She just cried. And he was so tired. So he left her. He just untied the ropes. And he said, sleep. In the morning, I am too tired now. But do you hear that? I am too tired now. I am too tired now. In the morning, I will cut the teeth and relieve you of the burden. I'm only doing it once. You're a mother, you'll understand, yeah? Only once. And she didn't say anything to him. And he then went to sleep. And in the morning, his wife got up and he told her, get me something to eat so I'm strong enough to take the teeth to the coast. And so she went. And it was because the granary was almost empty. When she got to the granary, what did she find? What was hidden at the bottom of the granary? Her clothes. Her clothes. She saw her clothes and she was so happy. She was so happy. She saw her clothes and she wore her clothes. And when she saw her clothes and she wore her clothes, she became herself again. She bent over, her tusks almost touching the ground, and she turned the granary over, and she trumpeted to the sky. And she made such a noise that the potters in their room were shaking, and Ivonyangai was too scared to come out. And she walked out of the granary, and as she walked out, anything that was in her way, any tree, whoosh, it flew aside. And she walked any bushes that were in the way, she trampled on them. Any tree, she turned them upside down, and she disappeared into the savannah. And by that time, the porters had come up, had woken up, and they rushed outside to see, now that it was calm, yeah? So they rushed outside to see, and they said, do our eyes deceive us? Is that an elephant? Quickly, grab machetes, grab your guns, grab whatever, grab any tools you have. And so they did. Any weapons they had, they grabbed and they went out to chase the elephant. In the meantime, Ivonyangai is waiting for his wife in his bed. And he gets up and he says, I don't know what that noise was about. I better go and see that my wife is safe. And when he rushed outside to look for his wife, she was nowhere to be seen. And he looked for his wife and he started crying, saying, my wife, my big, beautiful woman, where is she? Where is she? And to this day, if you meet Ivonyangai, he's still crying. Where is my big, beautiful woman? Where is she? Where is she? And to this day, those of you who are related to her, because she left descendants, you see, those of you who are related to her, when you hear the hunters sing, Tembo, 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 how do you feel? You feel sad. Those of you who are hunters, descendants of the hunter, you're the ones who sing it even louder. When the other ones feel sad, you sing even louder. You sing? So are you a hunter? Or are you a descendant of an elephant? Because what was his wife? She was an elephant, yeah. All right, thank you very much. All right, I'll ask if anyone has questions. Does anyone have questions? Does anyone have questions or comments?
Where does this story come from? I missed the beginning, sorry.
No worries. A lot of my stories are drawn from stories I was told by my grandmother. Now, my grandmother didn't tell me that particular story, but it was popular amongst, I'd heard it from people of her age group after she died. But it wasn't, I put it together. It wasn't like that because a lot of the oral tradition has sort of died in Kenya. So you tend to get fragments, not the whole story. So when I went back to try and find out the source of my grandmother's stories, oftentimes I'd only get little snippets. So then I create the story. So the original snippet was just about a man who courted a big, beautiful woman that he didn't realize she was an elephant, and she turned him down, and that was the end of the story. So, so I then created the rest of the story.
Wow. That's a really good addition, I guess. Yeah.
There's a lady behind you.
When did you start writing stories, and when did you start writing from a feminist angle? This is a feminist story, obviously. Yeah.
Absolutely a feminist story. Not all my stories are feminist, or
this one
this particular one is, and I do have a number of them that are in this sort of thread. I tell this story a lot more now than I used to, and I think it's because of many things I've come to realize are true. Like when I arrived in Bangladesh, and many people were telling me, "Oh, you can't go shopping by yourself. You have to be very careful." And I said, "Why do you have to be careful? You're a woman." And I said, "Well, gosh, that's the same story I keep hearing in Nairobi. You can't go shopping. I hear it in Lagos. I hear it in so many different places in the world. And the whole idea that a woman is not safe in her skin, that really bothers me. And therefore, I end up telling this story a lot more to say we are entitled to say no. We're entitled to our skin. We're entitled to be with our kind and our kin. And by that, I mean greater than, color, race, whatever. I mean people who think and believe like us."
Yes, your stories are if your stories are like this, really helping the women rights activist movement. But how do they sell? Do they sell well in your country or outside?
I haven't really tried to crack an international market. I have to say this is the first time I'm really I'm making a thrust to reach outside of my borders. I've told stories, like I've been invited once or twice to tell stories in schools in the UK and in Italy, but it's been very small and fragmented. Nothing, nothing that I've determined. No particular pattern or structure to it. It's more accidental meetings that result in it. But there is now, I am intending going forward to more actively try and share these stories, because I do find that African stories have an audience, there's interest, but the distribution is so poor. The access to storytelling, even within Kenya, by the way, very poor. People just don't tell stories the way they used to. Feminist stories, even more rare, because especially for adult stories, and although this story cuts across and children understand it, etc., it really is an adult story, which I tailored because we seem to have mainly adult audiences. I find that in the adult writing, many of the Africans I meet anyway are men. So I always want to make sure women are in some way represented, their voices heard, that sort of thing. But I've been writing for now almost 15 years. I'm a lot older than I look. I'm 54. It's a lot older than I think almost everybody
old.
here.
That's not old.
Except you.
I'm 86.
Oh, I love it.
And I write stories.
Yes.
That's why I want to know.
I celebrate that.
The secret of writing stories that can be sold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Because
think it's
if
about
I'm
marketing,
writing a
isn't it?
story that's against the social thinking, it's not going to sell, is it? Because here in Bangladesh, there are so many controversial ideas that are coming up. And a story certainly is always needed to pick up those issues. Yet, we don't find the platform for readers so readily for a story that is revolutionary like yours, for instance.
I hear you. I
Thank you.
think, there's a responsibility, I think, also on the part of writers to market their stories more effectively. And I think for a long time we've assumed that people listening to the pearls of wisdom dropping from our mouths is enough. And I think perhaps we need to go a bit further than that. So like one of the things we do is we launched something we call the National Read Aloud. The reading culture in Kenya is very poor. It seems very different here in Bangladesh, and I really celebrate that. But in Kenya, it is so poor. About 95% of the market is really the educational sector. If you're trying to sell literature or anything that's not intended for schools, for exams, that sort of thrust, it just does really poorly. So one of the things we did is we looked for a world record to break as a way of promoting reading. And the record we found was the greatest number of people reading together from the same book at the same time. And they could be in different locations. So what we do is we recruit schools. So this last year, we do it on the Day of the African Child in June. And we do it on the last Friday in January. So I invite Bangladesh to participate. And what we do is we read an excerpt from my book called Attack of the Sheeders. It's science fiction. It's actually intended for somewhere between 10 and 12 years. But in Kenya, it's actually taught in Form 1, which is sort of 13, 14 years. And what we do is we read from an excerpt from the story that I've summarized the storyline, which is about invisible aliens attacking a water source in a desert in the north of the country, a desert town. And as the water runs out, the three communities that live there, because they can't see how the water is disappearing, and they know they're under threat without water, they start blaming each other, and war breaks out. But there are these three children who have superpowers, and they can save that town. They can save the water. But who will believe them? Because they're children, A. 2, one of them is disabled, is blind. And 3, they are from the 3 different communities. They're not even allowed to be together. They're not allowed to spend time together. Nobody believes them. Anyway, so I wrote this book. It was actually commissioned by the Kenyan Human Rights Commission. And it was commissioned after the post-election violence of 2007, 2008. And what happened is they did research after the post-election violence that showed the level of ethnic animosity amongst children, very young children, was so high. And it was a huge concern. Because there are children who said something like, I think it was 27% of the children had heard people in their families, people in their local communities saying, we want people of a certain tribe thrown out, actually thrown out of that land, chased away, that sort of thing. And so I wrote this in response to that to say there's got to be a way we can talk about it that's much more sensitive than actually naming, individual tribes or, so we run the National Read Aloud. So last year, the world record was held by America. And it was 223,000 people reading from the same text at the same time. And Kenya broke the world record on the Day of the African Child. And we had 229,000 children reading from the book at the same time. And now we are aiming to get to 1 million. So I invite Bangladesh to join us on the last Friday in January. You just grab a copy of my book. You can get it at the bookshop. And we'll do that. But I'll also say this. We were talking with Paro Anand yesterday about books for boys. And one of the big challenges I think a lot of families face is a lot of boys lose interest in reading. And partly it is because so many books for children are written by women, and inadvertently, which is an echo of what happens in the patriarchal society that we are, it sort of happens because of conditionalities. We're conditioned that way. It just happens. So a lot of books that are written really appeal more to girls than to boys. So this year, I have decided that I'll be writing, for 1 year, I'm going to write for boys. So apart from that, so my very first attempt is Baba is building a new road. Because my nephew lives, where my nephew lives, he's 4 years old. And they're building a road across from his house. And it's very dusty. It's constantly dusty. So the windows have to be closed all the time. But he's always standing at the window looking out because of these amazing machines that, that pass along. And he's always saying, which is that one? What is that one? What is that one? Anyway, so I wrote, he inspired that book. But I also write a lot of books inspired by just how beautiful Kenya is. So we have the Indian Ocean, but a lot of Kenyans have never actually seen what is in the ocean, just as I'm sure a lot of Bengalis have not seen what's inside the Bay of Bengal. And what happens is that when I turned 40, my husband took me snorkeling for the first time. And when I put on those goggles and I saw what was beneath the water, my eyes literally popped out of my head. I could not believe, the animal life, the creatures, these weird and wonderful things that I thought were only in Walt Disney type of films, that were real, And they're there and they're in Kenya. I was like, hiya, everybody needs to see this, eh? So to make sure everybody saw it, I wrote a book called The Matatu from Watamu Drove into the Sea. And I noticed when we were driving here, I can't remember what they're called, the public taxis, what are they called? They're CMGs? Well, CNG. CNG? Well, in Kenya, they're called matatus. So they're very colorful. They drive very badly, just like I saw here. So I tried to imagine if a CNG drove into the sea, what damage would it cause? So I wrote The Matatu from Watamu Drove into the Sea, and it causes all this environmental damage, and it's a poem. It's written as prose poem. Anyway, it's available over there. Then finally, I'll tell you about this book. I'm from Kenya. Most people who know Kenya know it because what is the stereotype of Kenyans? We can run. We can run, yeah? Kenyans are runners, eh? We break more world records in running than any other country on earth. Yes? Yeah. Some of us are Kenyans, and we cannot run. We cannot run to save our lives. So when I was young, my father was very keen on sports. And when I was young, my father was a civil servant, and one of his colleagues' daughter was a very successful athlete. She played tennis for Kenya. She played hockey for Kenya. She was just so impressive. And every time she won something, my father would make us watch TV. We'd drive all the way to Nakuru. There was no TV in the bush where I grew up, in the forest, yeah? But we'd drive all the way to Nakuru, 25 miles away, the nearest town, to go and into the local bar, where there was the only TV in the town at that time. And we'd sit there and we watch, this lady, she's called Betty Wamalwa, who happens to be a really good friend now, but I resented her all my life. And we'd watch her receiving awards from the president, and she was this little girl. And my father would hit me on the head, and he'd say, why do I bother feeding you? You can't even run. You can't do anything. You're not an athlete. Why do you call yourself a Kenyan? Anyway, so on sports day, we took part in these races, and they were mandatory. And invariably, I was last. I didn't try to be last. And so they nicknamed me Mokiha, which means the last engine of the last carriage on a train. So I wrote this story about a boy who had difficulty winning races, and because of that was perceived to be worthless, right, by many, or he thought he was perceived to be worthless by his family. And anyway, so I wrote it for boys. But girls can read it too. Thank you very much. I think my session is over. I think I'm long over the time. It's perfect. Okay, so unless anyone has a question or comments, I think.
Hi, yes, I'm just interested to know whether you are a lone writer of children's stories in Kenya, or are there lots of writers like yourself? And how widely read are these books in Kenya? I mean, and what kind of children read it? Are they from what kind of social classes do they come from, your readers?
Okay, because I work for a publishing house, we work very hard to make sure our books are available, across all social classes. In fact, I dare say in Kenya, what happens is if you're upper middle class and above, you tend to read international. So you tend not to read Kenyan authors. It's perceived to be the lower middle, and the lower classes that read Kenya. That is changing, thank God, but not as fast as I'd like to see it. And also what happens is, because it's such an educational market, if you don't get your books approved by the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, it's very hard to sell. Books tend to be bought through the school system as opposed to, so you go into the bookshops and you wonder how they survive because they're so empty. They're literally, you're alone, you and your children. You're like these people on an island, on its own. So it's a challenge, but we're trying very hard to change it. In terms of writers, they're there. I mean, there are very many because Kenya is also very, very young. Our population is like a Christmas tree, very fat, at the bottom. So something like 50% of the population is under 16 years. It's very, very young. There are almost 1 million children born every year in every year group, which I know when you're in Bangladesh doesn't sound like a lot, because I understand 1 in every 50 people on earth is a Bangladeshi. I didn't know that. I heard that in a session yesterday. I was really shocked. But in Kenya, that's an exploding population. When I was born in 1961, the population of Kenya was about 6 million. Now it is 45 million. So the change has been phenomenal. So there are lots of children's writers, but they tend to write for the school system. Yeah. Sorry, I've been told I'm out. Can she ask a question?
Yeah, hi. You mentioned before that you write a lot of stories for children, and a few, less for adults. So why do you prefer writing stories for children more?
Because kids are more fun.